Social media has been instrumental in my crochet journey. If it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have had access to tons of different patterns, inspiration, connection, and community and friends. But I want to talk about something that is so easy to fall into, and we've all been there. And I know it's prevalent in other niches, but I kind of feel like maybe we're not talking about it here in the yarn world. It's the fact that it's okay to be average. And if you want to know what I mean with that, I would love it if you would stick around. So I gotta tell you, I'm average. I'm not exceptional, and I'm totally okay with that. I think that because we're so used to seeing so many images and so much marketing, it's really easy to kind of get down on yourself. They talk so much about how our culture has changed. Younger people are setting unrealistic ideas of, what their image should be like, what their budget should be like, what their home should be like, and all of that stuff. But I think that happens a little bit with us too. I just wanted to remind you that everything you see on Instagram and YouTube and all the other great places is a very small snippet of what that person's life is really like. I was watching a video from my friend Erica at It's Time for Yarn, and she's like, my yarn room's a mess, but you can't see it. You see this nice little clean area. She is so right. Like, this room is already a mess again, and I just did a yarn cleaning video not that long ago. That's the reality. And when we're looking at all of the Instagram reels and all of the different videos, we have to keep in perspective that what we're seeing online, it's such a small snippet and it doesn't really paint the full picture. I've got a couple things here that I want to talk to you that are completely average, and I just want you to know that you're normal if you're like this too, and that it's also completely acceptable to be average. The very first thing I want to say is that it's like totally okay to be buying cheap acrylic yarn that's affordable and that is easy for you to access. So I see absolutely gorgeous hand-dyed yarns on Instagram all the time. And I will admit, they are so visually appealing. I know that when they're, like merino blend, nice fine weight, that I would love working with them. But the reality is, at this point in my life, I don't have access to a lot of that stuff easily, and it's a little bit above my budget. I'm not opposed to spending on a few hanks for an investment piece, but I'm not really stocking my stash with $20+ hanks of yarn. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to either. Accessibility is such a big deal, and price. So yeah, if we're just going to a local big box store, that's totally fine. It's fine to be average. You don't need top of the line yarn to be a crocheter or to be a good crocheter or to enjoy crocheting. I want you to know that it's okay to be a slow crocheter. It's okay to not be mass producing huge amounts of crochet. I love watching some of my friends' videos where, they do like a weekly recap of everything that they've worked on. Some of these are like super impressive where, it's difficult things, it's intricate things, and they've done a ton of it. And then here I am. I got one beanie done this week, but that's okay. I'm not any less of a crocheter than the person who finished a shawl, a beanie, a hat, and an amigurumi all in 1 week. Like, I'm still just as much a crocheter, and that's all right. Another way that is perfectly acceptable to be average is it's totally okay to not want to design your own patterns, to not design your own patterns, and to just use other people's tried and tested and true patterns. That's just fine. I think it is amazing, and I follow so many great designers, crochet pattern designers that do make things. That is awesome, and I respect that. I admire that, but I haven't found a lot of joy in doing a ton of different trial runs on something and making different sizes and recording the different steps of it. Like, that's just not fun for me, and I don't want to do that. And to be honest, even before I was doing YouTube, to sit and make a pattern, it does require a lot of detailed note taking, which I don't really love either. While I'm not opposed to sometimes winging things, because I definitely do that, I just want to be in the moment and work on the project. And if it doesn't work out and it flops, that's fine. I'll come up with something different. But I don't want that pressure of having to sit down, make my pattern, and then have to be able to successfully recreate it. I would just rather crochet 5 other people's patterns in that time frame, and that's just fine. And while we're talking about patterns, it is totally fine if you want to do patterns that are well within your skill level. You do not have to be exceptional. You do not have to push yourself to be constantly learning and constantly pushing the envelope as far as what your skills are. And while I think sometimes it's obviously good to learn new things, it's not something that you are required to do. I like to do things that I'm familiar with and I know work and have worked for me multiple times. I've come to terms with the fact that every project I do does not have to be a growth opportunity for me. I can make things that are an easy skill level, even though I am more advanced with that. There is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be ashamed of about that. Everything doesn't have to be a learning experience or an experience to push yourself to a higher level. You can do patterns that aren't hard and still be just as good of a crocheter as everyone else. In one of my recent videos, I did point out a few different accessories that kind of help make crocheting a little bit easier. One of them was my neck light. Another one was like a yarn holder. So while I think that having the proper tool for the job is very necessary and helpful and beneficial and all that, you don't actually need to invest in all of the top of the line tools for everything. And by that, I definitely want to talk about hooks. I really like this boy hook. I don't know much about it. It was gifted to me, but I like the rubbery handle. And so this is lightweight. It's comfortable for me to work on, and I enjoy it. I don't really feel like I need more than this. And I've seen so many like Instagram reels with absolutely gorgeous or very personalized crochet hooks. And that's fun and fine, and that's awesome if you love it. But I'm here to tell you, you don't need to invest in a ton of different crochet hooks, especially if it's just more for the aesthetic. Like, you want something that's going to work with your hands. And in no way am I knocking any of the fancy crochet hook companies, but you just don't need it, and it's okay if you don't want to spend the money on that. Couple $1 hook is just fine. I feel like me saying is just fine is like the whole theme of this video, but again, we're just here talking about how it's just fine to be an average crocheter. As time has gone on, I've gotten a little less adventurous with the range of types of products that I want to crochet, and I've kind of gotten a little more into just doing some basic wearables. I have dabbled a tiny bit in a few different things. I've experimented with blanket yarn. I've experimented with novelty yarns. I tried a couple amigurumi, and what I've come to find out is a lot of those things just really aren't my jam, and even though they're super popular, I'm just not drawn to them. So that's not something I want to devote my time and energy into. And there's really no reason you have to make something just because it's popular and it seems as though everyone else is doing it. You can stick with a boring old project that makes you happy, even if it's just a beanie. Like, it's double crochet in the back loop. How boring and average is that? This It makes me so much happier than when I was attempting the Dollar Tree amigurumi. And that's a whole nother story. If you want to see that video, I will put a link up here. As I kind of mentioned with the hand-dyed yarns, there are some absolutely gorgeous colors of yarn out there. I had to put my hook down. I was still holding on to it. I think we've all seen different trends in colors, and of course that's going to happen the same way trends in colors for clothing change. You know, yarn is going to too. For different seasons, certain color yarns will be more popular. And I want to tell you that it's also okay to pick nice, boring, average, plain colors. There's absolutely no shame in sticking to what you like, and if it's boring and plain and neutral, that's just fine. I had purchased some of the Red Heart retro stripe when that came out because it is super fun. Like, it's beautiful. It's just like a super fun yarn, and I love the way it looks. I made a little bolero for a young girl out of that, and I loved it. I loved how it looked, and I had 2 other skeins in my stash for I don't know how long. It just got to be one of those things where I came to terms with the fact that this is a color, and while I can love looking at it in the skein, I'm never actually gonna make myself anything out of that because I'm average. And I like neutral and I like boring, and that's just not in my wheelhouse. I made sure to give it to a couple teenage girls who were learning to crochet, and it's worked out great for them. They're totally into that. But for me, a boring color palette just makes me so much happier. The last thing I'm going to talk about as far as being average, I've talked about in a few different other videos, and I can link a playlist where I address it in different videos, but I think that there's definitely a weird thing in the yarn world. It's where we've gotten accustomed to seeing super big yarn hauls, and the reality is that when you're watching a large YouTube channel who's producing a ton or, doing tons of tutorials, they're going through a lot of yarn. Those pattern designers that I mentioned earlier, they are going through tons of yarn to be able to make sure this pattern works, that they can replicate it and do it in different sizes. They use a ton of yarn, more than the average crocheter is using. So while you will see a few yarn hauls on my channel, and it seems like once a year, if I can hit up that big clearance sale, I'll have a big yarn haul, but that's once a year. The most of my yarn hauls are, like $30 of yarn. So I just want to point out that that's far more in the average. Weekly yarn hauls or monthly yarn hauls aren't really the normal for your average person. Some people in my comments will even say, like, I'm not buying any yarn this year. Like, they're like, I have enough yarn. So that's really more the reality of purchasing yarn. And I don't ever want anyone who's watching one of my videos to have like that feeling where they feel less than, or like they're missing out on something watching a yarn haul that I might do, because I try to keep my yarn hauls pretty darn reasonable. I don't like spending a lot of money, and I really try to purchase yarn with a purpose. And if you want to know a little bit more about my motivation on that, I will link a video up here that you can watch. I would love for you to check that out. But just keep in mind, what you see on YouTube is not what the average person is purchasing or consuming for yarn, and that's okay. So what do you think? Are you average? Is it weird to talk about it in that way? I feel like so much of our culture is like about being above average at everything, and you know what? Who cares? But I just want you to know that you're normal, that a lot of us are like that, and you don't need to be the best of the best of the best or have the best of the best of the best to be a confident crocheter. I want to thank you so much for being with me today and talking about yarn with me. I'm looking forward to talking with you again soon. Bye.